Hello fellow keyboard nerds, Brian Norbauer here. I just wanted to make a quick video concerning the care of and maintenance for polycarbonate keyboard housings, particularly frosted ones. I have here with me the Norbiforce Mark II Ghost of Christmas Future Edition. This was a limited edition that I offered exclusively to members of my newsletter list on Christmas Day only. Kind of the concept is that it looks like ice, and therefore would be sort of on theme for a winter holiday. The interesting thing I think about frosted polycarbonate is that I would class it in with other finishes of mine that I call veracity finishes. And I call them that because they are what they advertise themselves to be. There's no coating on the surface. What you see on the surface is the same material that it is throughout. An excellent side effect of that property of the material is that it is maintainable, because we can sand the surface of the part and not worry about cutting through a finish to the underlying substrate material. And that means that when scratches accumulate over time, as they necessarily do with any physical part, especially one that we spend a lot of time touching and interacting with all day, those can be polished or buffed out. Polycarbonate is traditionally frosted. You can certainly polish it to a high polish, but when you do that, it has a beautiful transparency, but every slightest touch becomes a visible scratch, and that is certainly not desirable. And so we made a choice, particularly with this batch of housings, to sort of essentially have a medium-high level of frost, because we figured that for most people in daily use that would be preferable, because it is the most likely to conceal scratches and wear that will accumulate over time. I am aware, however, that some people may prefer a more transparent housing, and they also may want the ability to make it more frosted or to cover up scratches that may occur over time. And so I'm including these abrasives, these abrasive pads from 3M. They're very similar to Scotch-Brite pads. They're essentially Scotch-Brite pads without the sponge. They're used for industrial applications, and as a result, they come in different grits. The red is the most abrasive. The gray is in between, and the white is essentially a polishing cloth that has very little abrasive quality to it at all. And so the practical upshot of this is that you can refrost the surface of the part with the red cloth, and you can reduce the level of frost with the gray and particularly the white. And I think I'll now show you exactly what that looks like. I have these two sample parts here that demonstrate just some basic concepts in surface finishing, and they show pretty clearly the difference between a part that has been abraded with a rougher grit surface, such as this one, which is a pretty high level of frost, and essentially how the parts will arrive to you from the factory, and this one, which has been polished with the gray abrasive pad that I mentioned. And in this case, I did it both on the inside and the outside, and it was shockingly fast and easy to do. This is not like an hours-long wet sanding process. It's really just a question of buffing it for a minute or so. And the nice thing about these pads is that they're highly conformable, and so they can actually get into crevices and corners really easily. And I found that certainly using the gray cloth on the interior as well as the exterior made the part really impressively translucent. It does look really cool, and it certainly makes the PCB inside of the part much more visible. The downside, though, as I mentioned, is that it is extremely prone to showing the slightest bits of wear. Many people are a little bit OCD about scratches, which is why the more frosted finish is the default. And so I'll try to demonstrate that a little bit here. Here we have a much more frosted part, and so I'm just going to scratch it up a little bit with my screwdriver, and then sort of rub over it a little bit. And those scratches are not particularly visible just because of the way that the light plays over the surface of the plastic. On a much more polished surface, the surface looks much more shiny and uniform, and therefore any aberrations or changes in the surface are just simply more visible. So I'll try to accomplish something along those lines here. scratches are really quite visible there. So our objective right now will be to get rid of those. In this case, I'm going to bring it up to the high level of frost first using the red pad. And this should also demonstrate the useful principle that by using the red pad, we're refrosting the part. So it'll become significantly more opaque just doing a little bit of circular motion here like this. So we already have a refrosted part, such that if those scratches are there, they've been concealed. But we then want to use the gray pad to bring it back to a greater level of translucency. Now, of course, beware that while you're doing this, you're removing material from the surface, and so it's going to deposit some powder. And you're not really going to know exactly what the result of what you've done is until you wipe away the powder from the surface, which is essentially the reason that I've included this white, largely non-abrasive pad, is it allows you to wipe away and give a final little bit of polish to the surface if you're going for a more translucent look. But I think the best way to do it, especially if you're going for this higher polish, is to just do a final pass, brushing it off with your hand. Now, as you can see here in the light, the scratch is gone. We braided it away with the red pad, polished it back to a high translucency with the gray, and then did a final level of polish and removed the powder with the white pad. The same principle applies, of course, if you want to keep the higher level of frost, which again I think most people will want to do. And let's find a way to intentionally scratch this, and hopefully in a way that's visible. Because we just want to stick with the level of current frost, we only need to use one pad. And the trick to this, again, is really just go in a circular motion. Don't go in a linear pattern, or it'll be much more visible that you've done some post-processing on it, rather than bead blasting it again. Clearly, the scratch is gone. All right, so I think that we've established here the core concepts of polishing and what the pads do, and how quickly they work. And I just wanted to show, since I didn't really go through the whole process of going from frosted to clear, exactly how striking that change can be and how quickly it is to achieve and move back and forth from one to the other. I think a good place to demonstrate this concept is here on the front of the part, where we have these threaded inserts. I'm going to leave one side frosted, and I will polish the other, and we'll see what the effects are. So this is the level of frost that it comes with from the factory. Let's make it a little bit more shiny. So it probably wouldn't hurt actually to start with the red one to just buff and smooth it down. I suspect that the red pad is actually a little bit slightly finer in grit than the bead blasting as it comes from the factory. One thing always to be aware of when you're polishing things is that you'll naturally polish corners a little bit more effectively than you will side faces, and so just be conscious of that. This corner will become polished first, and just because it becomes clear doesn't mean you've entirely finished the job yet. All right, so I started with the red one. Apologies for the poor focus here. And now I'm moving on to the gray. It does happen a little bit gradually, and so it maybe isn't as obvious as it might be, which is why I wanted to do one side and then not the other, and then we can compare. Use the white pad, then use your hand, and you will get a sense of the new level of frost you've achieved. So here is the level of frost, the default level of frost, as it were. And here is the new level of very rapidly polished frost. It's really quite a striking difference, and it happened pretty quickly and easily. So I think you have now sufficient principles for understanding how to change and maintain the finish of the polycarbonate to essentially get it to look exactly how you want it to look and to maintain it at that level as long as you'd like. Well, it didn't quite end up being the short video I had intended, but suffice it to say you now have a comprehensive education on the subject of polycarbonate surface finishing. A couple of things I want to mention are just sort of relevant caveats to the footage that I just shot, which I just reviewed. I noticed that, so both of these parts that I have here were just very hastily made sample parts, and actually I noticed that I didn't necessarily do the best job of polishing this more polished version, and there are quite a few scratches I could have removed if I wanted to be more fastidious, but I didn't honestly have the time to do that, so forgive me. Also, the studio lights and macro lens are not the most forgiving in the world. A couple of other things, well, one quick thing I also would like to mention is that on the more frosted parts, the simply by virtue of having a more matte finish and being a translucent part, they're going to be more likely to show finger oil, and I even noticed that in a couple of cases, like where I was showing you around the in the unfrosted area on the keyboard, where I had two sides for comparison. There were some areas that had finger oil on them, and those will tend to show up as darker. Of course, you can just use any light solvent, even like Windex or an alcohol wipe or something to wipe finger oil away in cases like that. Or I've actually found practically that the red pad works perfectly well for that as well. If you got one of these parts from me and it in any way doesn't fulfill your keyboard dreams, please send me an email. My job is to do precisely that, and if I haven't achieved that goal, I want to fix it. So just reach out to shop@norbauer.com, and I will attend to it. Thank you so much for enduring this long video on such an arcane subject. I hope it was helpful.